owning the ground. The keys were on the counter, just sitting there. Mark Halpern stood in the doorway, still holding the takeout bag in one hand, the other curled tight around the handle of the door. The apartment was quiet in the way empty places always are, like the silence had settled in long before he got there. He could hear the hum of the fridge, the faint tick of the wall clock, and nothing else. No music, no water running, no voice calling out, "Hey, you're late again." Just the keys and the envelope beside them. He didn't move at first. His eyes flicked to the couch clean, cushions fluffed. The coffee table cleared off, no laptop, no mug rings. Then the hallway, where the bedroom door stood wide open. Lights off. Mark stepped inside slowly, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft click. He set the takeout down on the table and reached for the envelope. His name was written on the front in Jenna's handwriting, always too neat, too deliberate, like she was afraid of being misunderstood. He opened it. Termination. Effective immediately. The letterhead was from the firm, their firm. Well, technically hers now. The phrasing was legal, precise, and utterly impersonal. Due to a restructuring of leadership and vision alignment, your role is no longer tenable. We thank you for your contributions and wish you the best in your future endeavors. Below that, Jenna's signature. Not even a handwritten note, just digital ink. The door to the bedroom creaked and Mark turned. Jenna emerged, dragging a suitcase behind her. She didn't look surprised to see him, just tired. Her hair was pulled back, face bare, expression unreadable. Behind her, Greg Winslow followed, carrying another bag, his leather shoes clicking against the floor like punctuation. Mark's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Mark," Jenna said, pausing. She didn't meet his eyes. "I didn't expect you this early." Greg didn't say a word. He just stood there, arms crossed, jaw set, like a bouncer waiting for a reason. Mark looked at the suitcase, the overnight bag. Greg's hand on her back. "How long?" Mark asked, voice low. Jenna's eyes flicked to his for the first time. "Don't do that." "How long?" he repeated. She exhaled. "It's been coming for a while. You've been somewhere else for months, building things no one asked for, ignoring the board, skipping meetings." "I built the platform," Mark said. "I built it from nothing. And then you stopped listening." Her tone was brittle, practiced. The board needed someone who could represent the brand, who could lead, not just code in a vacuum. Greg finally spoke. "It's done, Mark. You've been bought out. Clean exit." Mark stared at him. "You're a consultant, Greg. You don't even work here." Greg shrugged. "I do now." Jenna stepped forward, dropped her key fob on the counter with the others. "You'll get the final numbers through Carlson. The equity split is fair." "Fair," Mark echoed. "Don't make this ugly," Jenna said, softer. "Please." Mark said nothing. He watched them walk out together, suitcase wheels catching on the front mat. The door closed behind them with a soft, final thud. He stood there for a long time, the letter still in his hand, the silence thick around him, the takeout on the table, growing cold. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. But this moment, this hollow, echoing departure, had been set in motion long before the keys hit the counter. It had started with rain on the windshield and a pink sticky note on the driver's side window of his Civic. Vehicle must be moved within 24 hours, or will be towed. He'd slept in that car for 3 nights, not because he had no place to go at first, but because he couldn't bring himself to make the calls, to explain, to say, "Hey, Jenna kicked me out. And, oh, by the way, she took the company too." The 4th night, he tried calling Bryce. No answer. Then Megan. Straight to voicemail. His name was still on the cap table documents, but his face had already been scrubbed from the website. No one wanted to get involved. By the 5th night, the Civic was gone, towed. He didn't have the $200 to get it out. He spent the next week rotating between bus stations and 24-hour diners, nursing a single cup of coffee for hours, using free Wi-Fi, pretending to be just another guy working late. He shaved in gas station bathrooms. He wore the same clothes. He stopped checking his email. It was a blur of rejection and inertia, of watching the world move on without him. Jenna and Greg were in tech blogs, doing interviews, talking about visionary pivots and streamlined strategy. His name was never mentioned. The The public narrative had no room for the founder who got left behind. He started walking, miles at a time, not to go anywhere, but because standing still felt worse. Sometimes he'd find himself outside old buildings he'd once pitched in, conference rooms where he'd demoed prototypes, places that still had his fingerprints on their firewalls. He kept moving. Eventually, he found a co-working space with a free trial week. He signed up under a fake name, used a burner email, sat down at a terminal, and just stared. Then he opened a blank document. Not a resume, not a pitch deck, a plan. It started with a list. What he still knew, what he still had access to, what he could rebuild. He thought about the dependencies, what Jenna's new division couldn't function without. The vendor APIs, the hosting frameworks, the tools they took for granted because he'd made them invisible. He had always built quietly. Now that quiet was his weapon. At night, he slept in the back of a delivery van he found unlocked behind a bakery. During the day, he coded, not for anyone else, just for himself. A new platform, remote team tools, modular, fast, anonymous, Osprey Tech. No names, no founder bio, just code and functionality. He built it like a ghost, registered entities in Delaware using nominee services, routed payments through shells, kept his name off every document. When early users asked who ran it, he ignored the emails. When the metrics started climbing, he didn't celebrate. He just kept going. One night, in a motel room paid for with a prepaid card, he watched an interview Jenna gave on a podcast. She was talking about innovation, about legacy. Greg sat beside her, nodding like a bobblehead in a blazer. "We've learned to value narrative over noise," Jenna said smoothly, "to focus on what scales." Mark smiled in the dark. She didn't even know what she was standing on. Not yet. From dumpster rage to bet-on skills. The frost had crept in through the seams of the van windows, settling over the windshield like a warning. Mark rubbed his hands together, breath curling in the dark, and pulled the threadbare sleeping bag tighter around his shoulders. Outside, the parking lot of the 24-hour supermarket was lit by harsh halogens, casting long shadows over the frozen concrete. A delivery truck hissed past. Somewhere in the distance, a cart collector whistled to himself, oblivious to the man sitting hunched in the back of a stolen nap. Mark had been there for hours, too wired to sleep, too drained to move. The motel room had been a temporary fluke. He'd caught a client payment early and risked the splurge to shower and exhale for one night. But the prepaid card balance was back to zero, and the van behind the supermarket was his reality again. He stared at his cracked phone screen. Battery at 4%. No charger, no power. No more borrowed Wi-Fi from the cafe that had finally started locking its signal. He didn't feel sorry for himself. That stage had passed weeks ago, when he'd still thought about calling someone, anyone, for help. Now, he just felt sharp, like the cold had stripped away everything that didn't matter. Jenna's voice still echoed in his skull. "We've learned to value narrative over noise." Delivered with that curated smile, the one that made venture capitalists lean in, and interns believe in something. She'd always been good at that, making belief feel like strategy. But belief didn't build systems. He did. Mark sat up, arms stiff from the cold. He reached under the passenger seat and pulled out the spiral notebook he'd been using. Half the pages were smudged with condensation and ink bleeds, but the diagrams were still legible. Flowcharts of dependency trees, lists of open-source modules, notes on LLC structuring, tax pass-throughs, and Delaware's arcane corporate veil protections. He flipped to a blank page and wrote one line in the block letters. "No more reacting." Then, underneath, "Build the system they can't see." His pen hovered. He wasn't just going to survive this. He was going to own the ground they stood on. Quietly. Permanently, without needing to be seen. Mark Halpern sat alone in the frozen shell of a van behind a supermarket, and something inside him broke. Old self-trusting collaborative died the night Jenna said streamline strategy and left his name behind. No more compromise, no more needing credit. Only one question now. Not if they paid, but how thoroughly. Broken things made sharp edges cut clean. He opened the notebook again, created a new section. Acquisition targets, not companies' dependencies. DNS hosts, vendor contracts, API licenses, anything Jenna's division couldn't function without. If he could insert himself quietly into those supply lines, he wouldn't need a seat at the table. He'd be the legs under it. He walked to the 24-hour diner 3 blocks down when it opened, ordered coffee, no food, sat in a booth with an outlet and charged his phone, started looking for remote freelance gigs, anything that paid in crypto or accepted prepaid cards. He was already building Osprey Tech, but he needed cash to keep moving, a cheap Chromebook, a new SIM, maybe even a mailbox rental if the funds stretched. He found a job posting for a small logistics firm in Iowa. They needed a contractor to integrate Slack bots with their warehouse management system. $200. He sent a proposal under a fake name, finished the job in 3 hours, and got paid in Bitcoin. Used half of it to buy a used Chromebook from a pawn shop 2 towns over. The rest went to a new prepaid card and a mailbox address in a strip mall. That was the rhythm now. Work, build, hide, repeat. He registered shell entities through nominee services, learned how to mask IP addresses, studied contract law at the public library during the day, sitting at terminals next to retirees Googling their medications. At night, he coded. Osprey Tech grew in Silence modular tools for distributed teams, clean UI, fast onboarding. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. Small clients started appearing, startups in Southeast Asia, nonprofits in the Midwest. One surprisingly large NGO in Berlin. They didn't know who ran it. They didn't care. The tools did what they promised, and the support tickets were answered within hours. Mark automated everything he could, created dummy support agents with AI-generated names. Derek from onboarding had a friendly tone. Nina from billing was concise and helpful. Mark played all their parts, switching voices as needed, responding from coffee shops, library terminals, parking lot hotspots. He tracked every dollar, every user, every dependency his clients brought with them. Some used hosting providers he recognized, ones Jenna's division relied on too. Others used invoicing services that had overlapping infrastructure. Mark mapped it all. Every overlap was a potential lever. The work consumed him, not in a frantic way, but with a precision that felt surgical. He shaved in gas station bathrooms, Ade protein bars and diner toast, slept in short bursts, always with a notebook nearby. He didn't miss people, not yet. The silence was useful. It let him think. One afternoon, he returned to the library and found his usual terminal occupied. A teenager was scrolling through TikTok with the sound on. Mark sat at a different station, opened his email, and found a message from a small venture firm in Chicago. They wanted to talk to whoever was behind Osprey Tech. Said they were impressed by the velocity. He didn't reply. Instead, he opened a spreadsheet and began listing out the firm's known portfolio companies. Cross-referenced their back-end tools with public job listings, tech stack disclosures, and GitHub commits. 2 of them used Osprey Tech. He made a note, then another. He wasn't chasing funding. He was tracking leverage. Weeks passed. The frost gave way to slush. Then to rain. Mark moved between rented rooms above pawn shops, a storage unit with an illegal power tap, and occasionally a rundown Airbnb he booked under false names. He kept his world small, controlled. Every day he refined his tools, his entities, his maps of control. One night, he sat in a rented office space above a check-cashing store. The wallpaper was peeling and the radiator clanked every hour, but the Wi-Fi was solid and the door locked. He looked at the whiteboard he'd salvaged from a dumpster and drew a triangle. At the top, narrative. One corner, infrastructure. The other, control. Jenna had always owned the top. Greg had claimed brute force, but neither had ever respected the corners, the silent stuff, the boring stuff. Mark erased narrative and replaced it with facade. He circled infrastructure and control. That's where he would live. That week, he filed paperwork to quietly acquire a minority stake in a mid-tier server provisioning firm based in Nevada. Used a series of holding companies. The stake was small, but came with voting rights. He knew Jenna's team used them for back-end overflow. It was a start. He also noticed something else. One of Jenna's new hires had posted on LinkedIn about migration pain and tooling gaps. Buried in the comments, someone mentioned missing the old system. Osprey Tech had quietly replaced it. Mark didn't comment, just screenshotted the thread and saved it. He was building the trap, one dependency at a time. And no one knew his name. One evening, while waiting for a script to compile, he opened a private window and searched for Jenna's division. A new press release had gone out, Scaling with Empathy. She stood center frame, arms crossed, Greg half a step behind her, wearing that smug lost smile of someone who hadn't realized the tide had shifted. Mark stared at the photo. Then he closed the window. He had work to do. Osprey Tech. The fan in the ceiling ticked like a metronome above Mark's head, the only rhythm in a room otherwise still except for the soft clatter of his keyboard. The space was barely more than a glorified supply closet, wedged above a print shop that reeked of toner and industrial glue. But the rent was cheap, the landlord didn't ask questions, and the fiber line ran clean. Across his screen, a dashboard pulsed with usage data. Not just bots anymore, real users. 37 active teams spread across small consultancies, design agencies, and one surprisingly large nonprofit out of Minneapolis. They were using Osprey to track deliverables, assign tasks, sync across time zones. The interface was clean, the latency low, and the permission stack airtight. He leaned back, cracked his neck, and sipped cold gas station coffee. A few months ago, he'd built Osprey as a tool for himself, an obsessive's answer to bloatware. No gamified dashboards, no motivational nudges, no AI-generated check-ins. Just clean, auditable coordination. Now it was catching on. Quietly, organically. The first review that went semi-viral wasn't even from a tech blog. Some project manager with a YouTube channel had done a walkthrough titled, "Finally, a tool that doesn't try to parent me." It got shared on Reddit, then reposted in a Slack community for remote ops leads. Within a week, inbound traffic tripled. Mark didn't celebrate. He rechecked the onboarding flow for friction points, added a keyboard-only navigation toggle, and pushed a silent update to the permissions log. But even he knew it was time. He opened the folder labeled Front Face and scrolled through the shortlist. He'd been watching quietly for someone who could handle the public oxygen, interviews, panels, strategy calls, without needing to own the bones of the product. He needed someone who could smile into a camera while he stayed in the shadows. He dialed a number. Danica, Mark Halpern, we spoke last month. A pause. Right. From Osprey. You're the anonymous founder? Still am, but I'd like to change your title. Danica Miles had spent the last 5 years as a VP of product at a high-growth SaaS firm that flamed out in a spectacular, if well-lit, acquisition. She knew the dance, investor calls, onboarding decks, what to say on a panel when someone asked about team culture. She also knew when not to ask questions. That was key. By the following week, she had a branded email address, a polished bio, and a calendar full of coffee chats with industry press. She brought in her own comms contractor and quietly updated the website's About page to list her as VP of Strategy and Operations. Mark didn't appear anywhere. Danica didn't press. She got a monthly brief, a quarterly check-in, and a Slack thread called Signals, where Mark occasionally dropped screenshots, user quotes, or links to articles about shifting vendor preferences in the enterprise space. When people asked her who actually built Osprey, she smiled and said, "It's a team effort. We're distributed by design." The lie was technically true. Mark had started hiring contractors developers in New Hampshire, a UX specialist in Portland, a security consultant in Austin. None of them had met. They worked through encrypted threads, Git commits, and bug bounties with cash bonuses wired through Delaware LLCs. The only constant was quality and silence. Osprey Tech itself was incorporated in Delaware, with a minimalist site and a contact form that routed to Danica's inbox. But the real work, the architecture that mattered, lived in a lattice of holding vehicles. Mark had learned to draft operating agreements late at night, referencing templates Carlson had once sent him back when they still spoke regularly. Each entity had a purpose. One held early IP rights, another managed contractor payroll, a third existed solely to hold and vote the shares of strategic vendors. One of those vendors, SynPath Solutions, had just announced a new integration with Jenna's division. Mark already owned 4%, held through 2 layers of abstraction. He was working on 5. He wasn't chasing board seats. He didn't want headlines. He wanted levers. In a spreadsheet labeled Exposure Map, He tracked dependencies, which tools Jenna's team relied on, which vendors they used for storage, deployment, logging. It was all public if you knew where to look. Job postings, conference decks, GitHub readmes. He built graphs, circled nodes, and slowly began acquiring. Sometimes it was a direct equity buy. Other times it was more subtle. A convertible note here, a preferred option there, always through intermediaries. He never took controlling stakes. That would be too visible. What he wanted was influence just enough to shape policy, delay a roadmap, raise a price. He watched as Jenna's team started to complain, publicly, then internally. Why are our integrations breaking? Why is the support response so slow? Greg, in one of his more candid Slack leaks, had messaged, "We should just build our own stack. Tired of third-party bullshit." Mark saved that too. One night, as rain pattered against the single-pane glass of his rented office, Mark stared at the wall of sticky notes he'd arranged in a grid. Each one marked a decision point, a product dependency, a contract renewal, a vendor integration. He picked up a note labeled Talon Metrics Renewal Q4, scribbled something on the back, and moved it to the left column marked Leverageable. Then he opened a secure channel and sent a message to a contact he'd quietly cultivated through an industry subreddit. Curious if Talon's opened a new capital, passive, long view, quiet. The reply came back an hour later. Maybe. Why? Mark smiled. Just a fan of their work. By the time Danica landed a podcast interview with a mid-tier tech journal, Osprey had crossed 200 active teams. She spoke fluently about asynchronous workflows, onboarding friction, and trust-first design. Mark listened to the interview with the volume low, his fingers moving across the keyboard. He flagged 3 moments where she could tighten her messaging, sent her a note. She replied with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. He liked her. A week later, a journalist tweeted a question, "Who's actually behind Osprey Tech? Cleanest UX I've seen this year, and no one's claiming it." Danica quote-tweeted it with a shrug emoji and the words, "Distributed by design." Mark watched the retweets climb, then closed the tab. He wasn't building a company, he was building a dependency. The difference mattered. One morning, he walked into the office and found a manila envelope wedged under the door. No name, no return address. Inside was a single-page flyer from Jenna's division. A glossy one-sheet promoting their Vision 2030 initiative. Greg's face was on it. So was Jenna's. Their names were printed in bold next to phrases like resilience through empathy and redesigning the future of work. Mark ran his thumb along the edge of the page, then folded it once and slipped it into the back of a drawer labeled Fiction. Later that day, he pushed an update to Osprey's vendor API. It introduced a deliberate delay, a half-second lag, in a feature only used by larger clients. Not enough to notice, not immediately. But it would show up in their dashboards, subtly warping their analytics. Enough to raise questions, enough to plant doubt. That night, he sat by the window with a takeout container of cold noodles and watched the lights flicker in the parking lot below. Somewhere, in a glass-walled conference room, Jenna was probably giving a talk about empathy and innovation. Greg was likely pacing behind her, wondering why the numbers didn't quite add up. Mark twirled a noodle around his chopsticks and smiled. He wasn't done yet. The second mailbox was in a strip mall outside Phoenix, a UPS store wedged between a vape lounge and a frozen yogurt kiosk. The clerk didn't ask questions when Mark handed over the paperwork for West River Holdings. Just scanned his ID, stamped the notary block, and slid the lease agreement back across the counter. "Need a key made?" she asked. Mark shook his head. "Just the forwarding." He walked out into the sun and checked his phone. Carlson had texted twice, both messages terse. "We need to talk. This is starting to smell like intent." Mark didn't reply. By the end of the week, West River Holdings had a minor stake in Clerking LLC, a back-end compliance vendor used by Jenna's division. Another shell North run. Strategic took a convertible note position in a tiny analytics platform based in Columbus, one Greg had championed in a podcast interview 6 months prior. Mark remembered the quote, "These guys are the next layer of operational intelligence. We're building around them." Now he was building inside them. The ownership layers were thin but deliberate. No single entity held more than 12%. The filings were routine, the transactions dull. but each came with a separate proxy agreement, pre-signed, quietly held in escrow at a boutique law firm in Wilmington. The trigger clauses were tied to change of control events, not just within the vendors, but in how they interfaced with Osprey's infrastructure. It was surgical, not sweeping, and it was working. Carlson finally cornered him in the studio. "You're not just isolating dependencies," he said, pulling up a diagram on the monitor. "You're building a trigger web." Mark didn't look up. "Precision is control." Carlson leaned on the edge of the desk. "Mark, you've got 3 operating agreements that conflict under Delaware code. If any of these hit arbitration, they won't. You don't know that. And if they do, you'll be exposed. Not just legally, ethically." Mark swiveled his chair slightly. "You think I'm doing this for fun?" Carlson's tone softened. "I think you're doing this to win, and I think you've already won more than you realize." Mark didn't answer. He turned back to the screen and clicked through a folder marked Dove Shell. Inside were time-stamped PDFs, purchase agreements, transfer memos, cap table snapshots. Each one was clean, each one was dated, each one ready. He opened a new window and drafted an instruction email to Marlowe and Keene, LLP. "Please release the escrow documents for West River and clerking to the designated agents, effective immediately." He hovered over send. Carlson's voice was quiet now. "You said you wanted to stay invisible. This pulls you closer to the fire." Mark's hand didn't move. "They made me invisible. I'm just keeping it that way." "You're not. You're surfacing. The gala's in 3 weeks. If you go through with this, your name hits the nomination list. That's public. That's traceable." Mark clicked send. A soft chime confirmed the transmission. Carlson rubbed his temples. "You're locking yourself in. No reversals now. You know that, right?" "I know." Carlson stood. "Then I hope you're ready for what comes next." The proxy cascade began the following Monday. A minor shareholder vote at clerking shifted board oversight to a Strategic Operations Committee formed under West River's guidance. The committee had 3 members. 2 were Mark's proxies. The third abstained from most votes. By Thursday, Osprey's vendor API logs showed a 15% drop in latency anomalies, exactly as planned. The vendors were adjusting their traffic, not knowing they were reshaping their own dependency trees in the process. Mark sat in the war room, a converted studio space with blackout curtains and 4 mounted monitors. Hannah popped in once with a question about onboarding copy, then quickly left when she saw the spreadsheets open. She didn't ask what Doveshell meant. She didn't ask why there was an envelope on the table addressed to the National Tech Leadership Foundation with a nomination form inside. She just nodded and left. Mark picked up the envelope. The form was already filled out. Carlson had tried to talk him out of it. "Let someone else accept on your behalf. Keep the myth alive." But Mark needed it visible. The awards show would air live, streamed across 4 platforms. He didn't need the trophy. He needed the frame. He sealed the envelope. That night, Carlson called from an airport lounge. "You've got 26 filings across 5 entities, all within the last 90 days. Someone's going to notice." "Not if they're watching Jenna. She's planning a launch. Vision 2030 is her white whale. She thinks the gala's her platform. You show up, it's blood in the water." Mark's voice was calm. "Good." Carlson sighed. "What do you want from this, really?" Mark didn't answer at first. Then, "I want them to understand who owned the ground they were standing on." The line went quiet. 2 days later, a courier dropped off a thick packet from Marlowe and Keene. Inside were notarized transfer forms, updated operating agreements, and confirmation letters. One envelope was marked Final. Mark opened it last. The memo was simple. Effective on the date of the awards gala, all escrow triggers would activate. Control of Clerking LLC via board proxy would shift to West River. Northrun's note would convert into equity, pushing them over the threshold for strategic oversight. And Osprey's infrastructure contracts previously unsigned would auto-execute via pre-approved digital signature. There was no clause for reversal. He signed the bottom of the memo and scanned it back. The next morning, Hannah brought in coffee and paused at the doorway. "Hey, just so you know, Danica's doing an AMA next week. She mentioned Osprey might get a shout-out." Mark nodded. "Thanks." She hesitated. "You okay?" He looked up. "Fine." She left. He wasn't fine. He was finished. The plan was locked, the triggers were set, and in 3 weeks, on a stage Jenna thought she owned, the ground would shift. They would smile for the cameras. He would be 3 steps ahead, and the fall would be public. Lights, name, ownership. The ballroom shimmered in soft gold and corporate polish. Rows of round tables, each topped with branded centerpieces and thin-stemmed flutes, stretched toward the stage. A gliding camera moved like a predator across the crowd. On stage, the host adjusted his cufflinks and flashed his teeth into the lens as the live feed came back from commercial. Jenna Winslow sat at the front table, flanked by Greg and the division's VP of Strategy, a sleek woman named Elise who wore her nerves as shimmer on her collarbones. Jenna's smile was practiced, her posture perfect. She leaned slightly forward, anticipating her moment. The air was rich with the scent of ambition and hairspray. Greg fiddled with his phone under the table, eyes flicking between the stage and a Slack thread that had gone unusually quiet. Backstage, 30 seconds before the cue, Mark stood in the wings, barely visible to anyone but the production runner, who'd escorted him. He wore a dark suit, nothing flashy, no tie. He looked like someone's general counsel, or maybe a slightly overqualified IT consultant. He stared at the floor, then up at the monitor showing the live feed. Carlson's message had landed 10 minutes earlier, a single word: executed. Elsewhere, in offices across New York, San Francisco, and Seattle, supplier dashboards flickered, clauses buried in vendor agreements, ones reviewed months ago by bored in-house counsel, sprang to life. Default triggers, control shifts, termination rights. The lights stayed on, but the wiring had changed. Next up, the host said, his voice smooth with scripted warmth, is the award for most transformative use of distributed infrastructure. This one goes to a company that has redefined how remote teams scale, especially under pressure. Jenna's eyes sparkled. She leaned toward the camera-friendly side of her profile. The host continued. The judges were unanimous. They called it elegant, invisible, and quietly revolutionary. The finalist is Osprey Tech. Applause rolled across the room like soft thunder. Greg clapped automatically. Jenna's smile didn't falter. She turned toward Elise and mouthed, "That's us." Elise nodded, still unsure how to hold her hands. "And tonight," the host said, "we're lucky enough to have the founder here in person." Jenna's eyes narrowed. The camera panned. It found him standing just beyond the curtain, now stepping forward into the spotlight. Mark Halpern, clean-shaven, composed, with a stillness that didn't beg for applause. He walked toward the stage with the calm of someone who had nothing left to prove. Jenna froze. Her hand, halfway to her glass, stopped midair. Greg turned. "What? Is that—" She didn't finish. "Is that Mark?" The camera caught her face, briefly. The production team cut away, but not fast enough. Mark approached the mic. He didn't touch the host, didn't smile, just nodded once and took the small glass award from the stand. "They told me I didn't need to speak," he said, voice low, steady. "But I'll say this. The most transformative thing about infrastructure isn't the tech, it's who owns the ground it runs on." He didn't wait for applause. He left the stage. In the control booth, a producer whispered, "What the hell was that?" In boardrooms across the country, legal teams opened shared drives and realized too late that the control rights they thought were buried had surfaced. A project manager in Palo Alto refreshed her vendor portal and saw the Osprey backend now routed through West River Holdings. A compliance officer in D.C. opened a file marked Clerking LLC and blinked at the new signatory list. Jenna's phone buzzed, then buzzed again. Greg looked down at his. "Why is legal pinging me?" Jenna didn't answer. She stared at the stage. Mark was gone. The host tried to recover. "Well, that was succinct. Let's keep it moving." But the room had shifted. The press table was already whispering. Elise leaned over, voice low. "I thought Mark sold his stake years ago." Jenna's throat felt dry. "He did. He walked away." "Then what was that?" Greg's phone buzzed again. He stood, knocking his chair slightly. "I need to—" "Sit," Jenna snapped, too loud. A few heads turned. Greg hesitated, then dropped back into his chair, his jaw clenched. "What's going on?" Jenna's screen lit up with a message from the general counsel. Subject line, "Urgent, Osprey Infra Contracts." She clicked. The email was short. Bullet points. 4 of them. Escrow conditions met. West River, now majority proxy via clerking. North Run note converted. Infrastructure contracts auto-executed. The last line hit like a spike. We no longer control the platform. Jenna's hands trembled slightly. She felt it and hated that she felt it. Greg leaned in, reading over her shoulder. What the hell does that mean? She didn't answer. She couldn't. In the back hallway, Mark passed through a side exit as quietly as he'd arrived. No one stopped him. No one asked for comment. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind of fall night that made the city look clean and sharp-edged. Carlson was waiting by a black car, arms folded. You did it, he said. Mark nodded. They see it? They see it. Mark exhaled. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, you're going to get calls, Carlson said. Some will want to buy, some will want to sue. Mark looked out at the street. Let them. Carlson studied him. She looked at you like she'd seen a ghost. She saw someone she thought had stayed buried. Carlson pulled the car door open. You're not going to the after party? Mark smiled faintly. No. Inside the gala, Jenna stood frozen, watching the screen above the stage as the next award began. Her world, the one she'd curated, spun on without her. But the center had cracked. Greg was on his phone, talking too loudly, trying to summon someone, anyone, with answers. Elise had slipped away, already texting a journalist she trusted, trying to reframe the narrative before it calcified. In the control booth, someone replayed Mark's speech. Who owns the ground it runs on? The producer muttered. That's going to be a quote. At Osprey's main supplier office, the CTO stared at the updated control sheet. West River? He said aloud. Who the hell is West River? His deputy replied, It's him, Halpern. Across social media, the clip began to spread. A quiet man stepping onto a stage, a name that hadn't been seen in 2 years. The founder was real. The myth had a face. At Jenna and Greg's home, hours later, the lights were on, but no one spoke. Jenna sat at the kitchen island, the award show playing muted on the screen. Greg paced behind her, barefoot, still in tuxedo pants and a wrinkled shirt. What the hell happened? He said again. Jenna didn't respond. She said Mark on live television, Greg muttered. You called him out. You gave him a name. She turned slowly. He gave himself a name. We just didn't see it coming. Greg stopped pacing. He's been planning this. For how long? Jenna stared at her reflection in the dark window, long enough to make us smile while he pulled the floor out. Greg looked away, swallowing hard. What do we do? She didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. The phone buzzed again. Another notification, another article, another headline. Osprey founder reemerges, claims control in live broadcast coup. Mark Halpern, architect behind Osprey Tech, ends 2-year silence. Greg slammed the counter with his palm. He made us a footnote. Jenna didn't move. He made us the story. In a quiet hotel room across town, Mark sat on the edge of the bed, suit jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled. The award sat on the nightstand, untouched. His phone buzzed once. A message from Hannah. Saw the stream. You looked calm. Hope you're okay. He typed a reply, deleted it, typed again. Thanks. You did good work. He didn't hit send. He turned the phone face down, leaned back against the headboard, and closed his eyes. The win was clean. The loss was permanent. They knew now. They knew exactly who owned the ground. After the signature. The courier arrived just after 9, dressed in the kind of uniform that blurred into luxury neighborhoods. Neutral, discreet, forgettable. He didn't make eye contact as he handed over the envelope, only asked for a signature on the tablet. Jenna signed without a word. The envelope was thick, crisp. Her name was printed on the front in small, centered lettering. No return address. She knew before opening it. Greg was upstairs, yelling into his phone. Something about liquidity. Something about legacy shares. He hadn't slept. He hadn't changed clothes. Jenna sat at the kitchen island again, same spot, same untouched coffee, and opened the envelope with a kitchen knife. Inside, the executive action notice. A cascade of legal triggers escrow releases, irrevocable proxy votes, a clean chain of ownership dissolving her division, stripping its assets, reassigning vendor rights. All final, no appeal. At the bottom, the final clause, all rights and licenses reverted to West River Holdings. She stared at that name. West River. She should have asked more questions. She should have noticed the quiet deals, the slow shifts in supplier behavior, the careful distancing. But she had been too focused on the spotlight, too confident that Mark had disappeared into shame or oblivion. Greg came stomping downstairs holding his phone. Legal says the board's convening without me. They didn't even loop me in. They're treating me like a liability. Jenna didn't look up. You are a liability. He froze, hand tightening around the phone. Excuse me? She finally met his eyes. You laughed when he left. You called him broken, said he'd never come back. Greg's voice sharpened. And you? You lied to him. You used him. Don't rewrite it now. The silence between them was no longer cold. It was clinical, a shared recognition of mutual fault. By noon, the press releases started rolling out. Osprey's parent entities had been absorbed into a single operational trust under West River. The Winslow division was dissolved in alignment with strategic realignment. Greg's name was absent entirely. Jenna's was buried in the fourth paragraph. Within hours, their company email accounts were disabled, office access revoked, private equity partners began withdrawing, PR firms quietly retracted them from upcoming panels. The yacht, technically leased through a shell firm, was listed for sale by afternoon. At the office, Hannah sat frozen in front of her screen, rereading the internal memo. She had helped prepare some of those proxy documents. She'd reviewed the vendor onboarding for West River. She hadn't known. She hadn't asked. Now the boardroom was empty, and people were whispering in hallways, unsure if they still had jobs. She opened her email and saw Mark's draft reply still sitting unsent. She'd never told anyone she had messaged him. It didn't feel like a betrayal at the time. It still didn't, but the weight in her chest said otherwise. She closed the laptop and stood. The office felt cavernous, like the echoes arrived before the footsteps. On her desk was the award program from the night before. Mark's name printed under Founder, Osprey Technologies. She folded it once, carefully, and slipped it into her bag. Back at the house, Greg had locked himself in his study. Jenna sat in her bedroom with a legal pad, blank except for one line at the top, Mark. She stared at it for a long time before writing more. She didn't beg. That wasn't her style. But she asked, for understanding, for some acknowledgement that it hadn't all been malice. She wrote about the early days, the nights they had all worked late, the shared ambition. She admitted she had chosen visibility over loyalty. She admitted she had been afraid he'd never make it, that he was too soft for the world they were building. She asked if it mattered to him, any of it, the work, the friendship, the years. She signed it only with her name, no title, no plea. The letter went out by courier before sunset. It arrived the next morning at a modest townhouse mailbox in a quiet part of the city. No one was home. The envelope sat inside until Mark returned from a walk, hair damp from the cold, a coffee in hand. He recognized the handwriting. He didn't open it. He took it upstairs, pulled out the shredder from the closet, and fed the envelope through without breaking stride. The machine hummed softly. The strips fell like confetti. He didn't watch them land. Later that day, he sat in a corner cafe, a small place with real mugs and a crooked bookshelf near the register. Rain tapped lightly on the windows. He had his laptop open, but he wasn't typing. The world had moved on. Social media had digested the story. Analysts had issued their takes, and the clip from the awards show had become a minor case study in narrative misdirection. Mark watched the street. People passed without noticing him. That was the point. The door chimed as a young man entered, no older than 20, damp hoodie, earbuds half out. He ordered something complicated, then turned, pausing when he spotted Mark. "You're him, right?" the kid asked, approaching with the cautious reverence reserved for live legends. "From Osprey?" Mark looked up. "I was." The kid smiled awkwardly. "That reveal? Total power move, like chess, not checkers. Everyone's talking about it." Mark offered a tight smile, polite but distant. "Glad someone enjoyed it." The kid hesitated. "So, what's next? You going back in?" Mark shook his head. "No, I got what I came for." The kid looked puzzled. "But you won." Mark looked down at his coffee. "Sometimes winning just means knowing when to stop." The kid waited a beat, then nodded, half understanding. "Well, Respect, man. Seriously. He left with a clatter of the door. Mark watched him go, then turned back to the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low and gray. He took a sip of his coffee. It had gone cold. Across town, Jenna stood at her window, watching the street. Her phone was silent, the inbox empty. The award she'd won, shared, now meaningless, had been moved to a box in the garage. Greg had left earlier with a suitcase and a call from his lawyer. She didn't know where Mark was. No one did. But she had a feeling he wouldn't answer, even if she called. In the cafe, Mark closed the laptop. He didn't need to check the headlines. He had no interest in the aftermath. The game was over, the ground was his, but owning the ground didn't mean you stayed to build on it. He left the mug on the table, nodded to the barista, and stepped out into the street. The wind was sharp, but it felt clean. No title, no plea, no encore. Just a man walking alone, having written the last word.